बजट में वंदे भारत स्टैंडर्ड की 40,000 आधुनिक बोगियां बनाकर उन्हें सामान्य यात्री ट्रेनों में लगाने का ऐलान किया गया है। इससे देश के अलग अलग रेल रूट पर करोड़ों यात्रियों में आरामदायक यात्रा का अनुभव बढ़ेगा। साथियों, हम एक बड़ा लक्ष्य तय करते हैं, उसे प्राप्त करते हैं और फिर उससे भी बड़ा लक्ष्य अपने लिए तय करते हैं। गरीबों के लिए हमने गांवों और शहरों में 4 करोड़ से अधिक घर बनाए। अब हमने 2 करोड़ और नए घर बनाने का लक्ष्य रखा है। हमने 2 करोड़ महिलाओं को लखपति दीदी बनाने का लक्ष्य रखा था। अब इस लक्ष्य को बढ़ाकर 3 करोड़ लखपति दीदी बनाने का कर दिया गया है। आयुष्मान भारत योजना ने गरीबों की बहुत मदद की है। अब आंगनवाड़ी और आशा वर्कर, उन सबको इस योजना का लाभ मिलेगा। साथियों, इस बजट में गरीब और मध्यम वर्ग को एम्पावर करने, उनके लिए आय के नए अवसर बनाने पर भी बहुत जोर दिया गया है। रूफटॉप सोलर अभियान में 1 करोड़ परिवारों को सोलर रूफटॉप के माध्यम से मुफ्त बिजली प्राप्त होगी। इतना ही नहीं, सरकार को अतिरिक्त बिजली बेचकर लोगों को 15 से 20 हजार प्रति वर्ष की आय भी होगी और ये हर परिवार को होगी। साथियों, आज जिस इनकम टैक्स रेविशन स्कीम की घोषणा की गई है, उससे मध्यम वर्ग के करीब 1 करोड़ लोगों को बड़ी राहत मिलेगी। पिछली सरकारों ने सामान्य मानवी के सिर पर दशकों से ये बहुत बड़ी तलवार लटका कर रखी थी। आज इस बजट में किसानों के लिए भी बहुत महत्वपूर्ण और बड़े निर्णय लिए गए हैं। नैनो डीएपी का उपयोग हो, पशुओं के लिए नई योजना हो, पीएम मत्स्य संपदा योजना का विस्तार हो और आत्मनिर्भर ऑयल सीड अभियान हो। इससे किसानों की आय बढ़ेगी और खर्च कम होगा। मैं एक बार फिर सभी देशवासियों को इस ऐतिहासिक बजट के लिए शुभकामनाएं देता हूं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
All right, that was Prime Minister Narendra Modi responding to the interim budget, referring to some of the highlights in the interim budget. And of course, we can expect a full budget in July. Well, we do have Dr. Naresh Trehan with us to help us shed some light on some of the things that have been happening there. Vinod Sharma with us as well. I'm going to talk to you about electronics in a second. But if you remember discussions we've often had, the focus on healthcare is always something that we used to hope would really come across in budgets and in government policies. Do you think that's now something which is a done deal when it comes to healthcare, the importance of healthcare and the importance of education?
So, as this budget is on account, even then some of the significant announcements were made in it. The fact that a lot of focus has gone on maternal health and child health, the inclusiveness of making more and more medical colleges, the fact that it also provides more employment has been addressed in this budget. So that's a good thing. And I think the best part of it is that inclusion of the Anganwadi workers, upgrading it, and then also giving them the facility of Ayushman. Because see, one of the things that is very important is that at the bottom to the last citizen standing in India, we need to take healthcare to a level where it is affordable for them. So I think that that is the huge impact of Ayushman that has happened, but extension of it to other workers, healthcare workers, is I think a very welcome move. Now, as far as other parts of healthcare, the vaccination for cervical cancer, which has been, worldwide, we know that it affects the young girls, women, and it carries a very high mortality. So if the vaccination is done as effectively as other vaccinations have been done, which I have no doubt about, then I think that it will be a big service to women and protecting them from cancer. So if you look at it, a lot of it has got to do with woman-centric, giving relief, which was lacking for them. So I think overall I must congratulate the fact that in a tight rope walk on a budget on account,
you still got some mention about healthcare in general. Yeah. But again, I spent the entire day today sort of doing report card of the last 10 years and looking ahead to the next 5 sort of a thing. So if you were to do that for healthcare, I don't think there's any doubt that when it comes to cities like Delhi and, for better people who have access to top quality, hospitals, healthcare is as good as anywhere in the world, if not probably better. The challenge is always how do you take that to 1.4 billion people? How far do you think we've gotten that part of the exercise thanks to Ayushman Bharat, and what can be done to expedite it? How do we make sure that more people have access to world-class healthcare?
Basically, the implementation of the scheme which was announced a few years ago has been a little patchy because some of the states decided they're going to push their own schemes and not accept Ayushman. So that whole thing has put a little bit of twist on it. But I think that as more and more states join in, either matching Ayushman with their schemes, this will go down, filter down to the last person standing, as we talked about before. The fact is Anganwadis are in the villages. Yeah. The fact is that Anganwadi workers getting more power and Asha workers being recognized more is a very, very positive move.
All right. Let me turn to the electronics sector, because we were just talking a short while back about automotives being one of the areas where this entire concept of let's make India the center of global supply chains, let's replace China, that's playing out in a couple of areas. Auto was one, electronics is another. What did you hear today? What have you been experiencing? What needs to be done?
Okay. If it's okay with you, Vikram, I'll first like to answer what's happened in 10 years, what we expect in the next 5 in electronics, and then come to vote. So what we're doing is, and I describe that as a 4 into 400 meter relay. So first, a lot of people don't know that electronics is actually the largest manufacturing sector in the world. Yeah. Now we also see the horizontal, so we don't like to call it a vertical anymore, it is a horizontal, it's a meta resource that helps healthcare, agriculture, automotive, of course, and many other areas. Now, including generation of electricity. So today, when we talked about solar, for example, electronics plays a big role. So what we've done in the first leg, which has taken all of 10 years, is to become an assembly hub for the world. Mobile phones is a very good example. I hope the IT hardware, air conditioning, LEDs are now following soon. But that's only the first leg. The second leg that now sort of concerns us a lot, and we are in touch with the government, hopefully in July budget we will hear some good news, or before that, is the components, the deep-rooted, value-added manufacturing of electronics, which needs a completely different sort of policy prescription than assembly. Also, that brings a very different kind of jobs. So the assembly jobs are easy, are more casual in nature, if I may use that word. These are deep value, medium tech to high tech kind of jobs, skills that will last for 10 to 20 years. And the world needs those kind of people, so our demographic dividend comes into that.
And the world will need it more and more. The more you have geopolitical tension, the more you are wary about China, the more you start getting worried about Taiwan because of the possibility of war out there. The world needs a replacement.
That's right. And I think the government has put their money where their mouth is in terms of the semiconductor policy. We need to do the same for non-semiconductor components, and that's the discussion. And you're absolutely right. So the whole geopolitical thing, when we started discussing 5 years ago, was we needed a China plus one. Today, in fact, in the commercial circles, we talk of ABC, anywhere but China, because that's not a trusted supply chain source anymore. Having said that, the third leg is actually designing our own products. The healthcare that India needs is different from somewhere else. Can we have our own diagnostic tools? Can we have, and all the startup ecosystem that comes with it? And the fourth one is to have Indian brands. I don't think we will reach what we want to reach without having our own Sony, our own Samsung. So I do think that some of our Indian companies will stand up and become brands for the world. So that's where we need to go. The first leg has taken 10 years, and for the next 3 we have only 5 years. So obviously we need to hurry up. Given that today the very short sort of space that the FM had to talk about this industry, I'm still happy that we talked about rooftop, we talked about electric vehicle charging, and I think the most, to me, the most impressive was that this 1 lakh crore fund that they're talking about for for entrepreneurs.
A lot of people have got attention to that, because that could
right.
potentially really kickstart a lot of R&D, a lot of development, easy source of funding. But of course, the modalities of how that is actually
we don't know yet.
Passed on.
That's
it
right.
has to be a simple, easy access. Some kid in a dorm somewhere should have the ability to say, I've got a great idea, will somebody come in and
can I take it to market? Yeah,
can I take it to market?
So. Yeah, so I like that Jai Anusandhan. I think it's a great word. I think innovation is in our bloodstream in India. Unfortunately, when we don't get it right, we do this whole jugaad shortcut. That's not what we need. So I think, I was listening to what CB was saying. One of the things that we still don't get right is quality. So I always say, today, if you look at, if you were to rate Japan, China and Korea, anybody on the street knows what the rating is in quality. Where are we as India? If we don't do things right, will we be number 1, 2, 3, 4? What is our aspiration? And I think those are questions we still need to answer. Yeah.
I think that's really well put. Thanks a lot, Vinod, for having been with us. Let me get a quick final take from you on the budget.
So, as Vinod was mentioning, that one of the things that is really pulling us down as far as healthcare delivery system is concerned is the high cost of equipment. And the more we develop our industry, electronic and medical industry and AI incorporated into AI, I think the better off we will be. And I think the future looks good, and all the things that we were talking about, innovation and all that, is only going to create that segment for the medical sector. And also, don't forget, what we do for India applies to 4 billion people around the world. So we have a great potential there.
All right, let me just rope in Lekha Chakrabarti now joining us, professor at the NIPFP, board member of the International Institute of Public Finance. How do you've had a little bit of a time to look at the budget. We've also been trying to figure out interim budget, of course, but the fact that there is a certain amount of fiscal discipline that she's talking to, 5.1, despite all the spending that is happening. Your reaction to some of what you heard in the interim budget?
Thank you. The fiscal arithmetic, that's very promising. She has not deviated from the fiscal consolidation path. And, any pre-election budget, budget credibility is very important than engaging in announcing the freebies. So that's welcome. But when we look into the revenue deficit, that's slightly high, because she can't do anything about phasing out of revenue deficit at this point, because it affects all the social infrastructure announcements she has made in the budget, and the employment generation programs, and even the income support to the farmers. So social infrastructure, that needs to be, given importance, and that's why her revenue deficit is still very high, and that's equally welcome. But, fiscal risk is now coming up. In the post-pandemic period, over the last 5 years, we kept our deficit and debt very high, linking it to the capex formation. And it is also, it's giving results, like with the, not instantaneously, but with the lagged effect, it's giving fruits that our growth is getting all right, because that didn't happen when we engaged in the recapitalization programs, or when we engaged in the bankruptcy code and all. It didn't work. Some missing piece of the strategy was there, and that's exactly the capex investment, and it is giving us returns. But at the same time, if the revenue deficit, if it is curtailed further, that's going to impact the social infrastructure. So this is quite welcome, that investment-oriented budget, the growth-oriented budget with leave nobody behind narrative, by focusing on physical infrastructure, digital and social infrastructure. And for women, that gender budgeting emphasis of access of women to credit, that's welcome, because on one side, the central bank policies with the interest rate management, that's mounting. The cost of credit is mounting. So
All right.
here, the access of women to the credit is welcome. Thank you.
All right. All right, Lekha, thank you so much for joining us with that very interesting perspective. Thanks a lot for being with us. Let me welcome two very special guests now. Mukesh Bhutani is back, of course, in a budget which he says no tax changes. I'm not sure how much tax-related stuff we have to talk about, but some of the other directional questions. So it's great to have you back with us. And, of course, Sunil Vachani, founder and chairman of Dixon Technologies. We were just talking about electronics, the largest, manufacturing area anyway. And as India tries to become the alternative to China and who knows, Taiwan perhaps as well, who better than you to tell us how that story is going? What did you hear in the budget? What needs to be done to enable us to achieve that dream?
Thank you, Vikram. I think, there is no doubt that we in India and the industry are sitting on a very, very large opportunity. And this opportunity of making India the next hub for electronic manufacturing. And I think if you see it in terms of numbers, right, if you see the global market, it's almost $900 billion in terms of the outsourced electronic manufacturing. And India is just 2% of it. Even a country like Vietnam exports almost $130 billion worth of electronics, from the country. And right now, what we are doing is hardly about $20 billion. So I think there is a long, long way to go.
But 2%, what percent would China be? What percent would...
I think China is the dominant player as far as electronic manufacturing is concerned, right? And I think if you look at the market size of some of the products that we talk about, so if you look at air conditioners, a product like washing machines or televisions, I think China does almost 10x of us. But coming back to the budget, I think, yesterday there were some significant announcements which were made. And these came in terms of the duty reductions. And I think I'll tell you why they're significant is one, because they help improve the Indian industry's competitiveness as far as the domestic market is concerned. Two, I think it will give a huge fillip to the domestic market for mobile phones also, because eventually these duty cuts will be passed on. But
I think what is interesting that those duty cuts were announced one day before the budget. You would have expected to see them
that's right.
Yeah,
that was surprising, but I think definitely welcome, no doubt. But I think what is most significant is that when we're looking at exports, global competitiveness, higher duties tend to get passed on, when we're looking at exports, even though our intention is that we don't export our taxes and duties. But let's appreciate that the tier 2 and the tier 3 suppliers eventually do not get refunds of these duties, so they get passed on. So I think what we need in the industry is not high duties, we need a correct duty structure. And I think that's why this step taken yesterday was very significant.
All right, Sunil, thanks for joining us. Before I come to you, very special guest joining us, Amitabh Kant, the Indian Sherpa to G20, is with us right now. Mr. Kant, thank you so much for being with us. Just wanted to get your first reaction to this interim budget that we've just heard.
So Vikram, first of all, I think it's the budget by a very confident government, which is very clear that it should not undertake populism in an election year. It will come back and take far-reaching measures. Secondly, it's budget by a government which is taking a long-term approach and saying that the real golden period of India will be the run-up to 2047. And therefore, you have to keep your macroeconomic fundamentals very strong. And that is demonstrated by the fact that the finance minister has brought down the fiscal deficit to 5.1% and says that it will come down to 4.5% in the subsequent year. So a clear roadmap. And that really means that the government will borrow less from the market. And when the government borrows less from the market means that interest rates will come down. And when interest rates come down means that the private sector will be able to borrow at a much lower rate of interest. And that in the long run is critical. To my mind, that's the major signal which has been given by this budget. Because the government had taken its capex spend very substantially. It's from 2013-14, it was just 1%. It took it up to 3.3% last year. It's taken it again to 3.4%. But to my mind, what it is aiming for is of crowding in private sector along with government capex spend and really pushing for private sector to go in and drive India's growth in the coming years. And that, to my mind, is really the key factor. Secondly, I think it's some of its assumptions, particularly its assumptions on nominal growth, is on a moderate side, and I think you'll have in the end you'll probably end up with better growth. Thirdly, the focus on some key areas like putting in about 1 lakh of crores for R&D spend is huge, because the private sector will then be able to push for deep tech. That is what India needs. India needs to grow in sunrise areas of growth. India needs to really drive its economy in a range of new areas, and deep tech is necessary. So if you are able to push for R&D with that 1 lakh crore, it'll be a major driver. The
Mr. Kant, in fact, I just wanted to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah. So
right.
That 1 lakh.
Mr. Kant, I just wanted to ask you actually. Mr. Kant, I actually wanted to just ask you in a little bit more detail about that 1 lakh crore rupees, because it's got a lot of people's attention. Now, you, of course, have earlier, Niti, and then even now you work very closely with a number of very bright young people doing startups, coming up with great ideas. Indians are innovative. Indians have set up some of the finest tech companies anywhere on the planet. What is your own sense of how this 1 lakh crores can best be channelized so it does get to people? Some young kid who's coming up with some new technology in a hostel room somewhere gets access to capital to be able to develop that and build that up and take that idea up at scale. How can this be done in the most efficient manner, according to you?
So, Vikram, this 1 lakh crore is really amount for R&D. This is not for deep tech. This is for R&D, where private sector can utilize it over 50 years at very low rates of interest. But what you are talking about is the need for driving deep tech through young startups. And that is critical. And to my mind, what the government has envisaged, of course, is they've talked about deep tech for defense. And defense really cuts across many of these areas of growth. Many innovations, when they happen in the defense area, they spill over to information technology, they spill over to energy and many other areas. And once you have a fund of funds, the basic due diligence will then be done by the venture fund, who will then be able to take the risk is taken by the venture fund, but then he utilizes fund from the fund of funds. Much of the success of the Startup India movement is because of the fund of funds which was created in the city. And I think that needs to be given a huge fillip for the deep tech sector. That's critical. And the third, I think the key area which the government has talked about is the 75,000 crores for states which are reforming themselves. And for them to use the 75,000 crores for infrastructure. And it's all milestone based. So the private sector, what will happen as a consequence of this is that you are really incentivizing the states to go in for reforms. You are incentivizing the states to push for infrastructure creation. And there again, the private sector will come in a big way. So the ultimate beneficiary of this also will be the private sector. And lastly, my view is that the focus on solar energy, electric vehicles, because if you are going to give 300 units free to those who install solar rooftop, means you are giving a benefit of close to about 15,000 rupees of electricity to the household. So that's a big incentive for people to put up solar rooftop. So that plus charging stations, electric vehicles, plus pushing for connectivity, railway connectivity to cement, minerals, ports, all this will be a big driver of infrastructure growth in the coming years. And that, to my mind, will reduce the cost of logistics in India in a very, very substantial way.
So if you were to look at the last 4 or 5 years and look at the roadmap that's being done out here, do you think that massive public spending on infrastructure that we've seen, railways, airports, ports, the road building program which is happening, is that something which you think is one of the most critical aspects in unlocking what was potentially one of the biggest bottlenecks to the rise of India and the growth of India? You couldn't become the third largest economy in the world if you had third world, infrastructure. Is that the reason why, and you think the government is going to go on spending this money on infrastructure just to make sure that you have to reach the highest quality of infrastructure all across the country?
So Vikram, if you look at it from a 2013 perspective in percentage terms, till the last year, you had a 592% increase in capex allocation. It's gone up from 1% to 3.3% of your GDP. So that's huge. And that's why you've ended up creating some great roads, some expressways. You've been able to build houses. You've been able to, improve your railway, all that. And that was necessary during that period when private sector had taken a retreat. What the government is now trying to do is, by making only a marginal increase in your capex from 3.3 to 3.4%, the government is saying that we will now crowd in private sector into many areas of growth. And therefore, it has kept the fiscal deficit at 5.1%. Now, if you were to increase your capex expenditure, many people are saying that capex expenditure there was potential for greater capex. But the more capex you do, then you increase your fiscal deficit, and therefore your lowering of interest rates will not take place because the government borrowing will take place. And therefore, it was very important that the government keeps it at 3.4%. Government focuses on bringing down bank rates, the interest rates down, and government focuses on bringing in private sector into infrastructure on a long-term basis, because efficiency, productive efficiency, better quality infrastructure, as you've seen in airports, all happens when private sector does the design, it does operation, it does maintenance on a long-term basis, it does toll collection. You'll have better quality private sector investment.
All right, Amitabh Kant, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective. It's always great listening to you and getting a sense of what the government has in mind. Before you leave us, maybe if you could, one or two quick points of the unfinished agenda which you think the government's going to push for now in the next 2 or 3 years ahead. What's the unfinished agenda?
Well, I think this budget is reflective of the strong macroeconomic fundamentals and its focus on inclusive growth. It's very clear that it's very confident that it's going to come back and then look at a long-term perspective of 2047. It's not a populist budget. It's not taken any populist measures. I think the unfinished agenda now really relates to the states. The states have to become the agents of change. They have to learn from what the central government has done, and they need to be the drivers of growth, and that will be critical in the years to come.
All right, Amitabh Kant, thank you so much for being with us with that perspective. Thank you so much. Amitabh Kant, India Sherpa to G20, talking about that. Mukesh Bhutani is with us, with us also. And Amrish Balika. Let me just quickly touch in first with you, Amrish. From a stock market point of view, what were you perhaps looking for? What were you expecting? I mean, it's the interim budget, so I'm sure the markets didn't have very high expectations of it one way or the other. But what do you make of it?
See, first, I think we're looking at the fiscal prudence, the fiscal deficit, which the markets were expecting to be between 5.3 to 5.5. I think there's a huge beat. She's announced 5.1, which is great. But I think there's still a risk of missing out on this, over the next 1 year, because it's much lower than what the market was expecting. So I think that risk is there. But then if you look at the capex spend, I think that is more or less in line with what the market was expecting, because we have seen huge increase in the last couple of years. That was because of COVID. We have seen a 32% CAGR. But this time it was expected to be about 12 to 13%. She's announced 11%, which is perfectly fine, because we are looking at the private sector spend, which has already started increasing. I think that should increase more. And clearly, I mean, the focus was expected to be on empowering the poor, youth, women, and farmers. I mean, that's exactly what has happened. And you've had a number of sectors which has, in fact, been benefited because of the budget. I mean, you clearly have the farm sector benefited, rooftop solar, I think that's a clear focus area, tourism, railways, housing, as well as R&D. R&D, again, would be more on the defense side of it, which is good for that sector. So overall, from a market perspective, I think it's a very decent interim budget. But then we should remember that the market had already run up decently well. So because of which we are not seeing a further move post the announcement.
Right. So, Amrish, from a point of view, somebody watching this, looking at the market, saying, okay, markets, as you said, have run up a little bit. What would you be doing right now? Buying, holding on, booking profits, selling and running for the hills? What would you be doing?
I think possibly the last option because we've seen a stupendous rise in the market in the last close to 12 months. I mean, if you look at Y on Y, we are 24% up. If you look at the number of stocks which have become multi-baggers, I mean, 600 stocks have become multi-baggers. I mean, you have about 2,500 stocks being quoted on a regular basis. I'm not talking of penny stocks. 600 decent stocks have become multi-baggers. So when that happens, normally it happens.
All right, Amrish, I think we just lost your signal. Thanks a lot. However, I think we got the sense of what he wanted to say. Mukesh, sorry, you've been waiting patiently while we were talking to Amitabh Kant. Your sense of the budget, what you heard, and directionally going forward. You did hear some remarks about how they would like to have this low burden, ease of compliance, ease of paying taxes. That's the direction that we will see a lot of returns from. And that's what the numbers, quite frankly, are bearing out.
Yeah. For me, there were two key takeaways. One was fiscal prudence. And it's not just about figures, 5.8 going to 5.1 and 4.5. It's just the manner in which she's been able to achieve it, largely thanks to revenue mobilization and tax buoyancy. But I think that this period will stand out as a golden period in fiscal consolidation. Historically, fiscal consolidation was driven by curtailing revenue expenditure, curtailing expenditure, and at the cost of curtailing capital expenditure. So it's not just the percentage of capital expenditure in the overall expenditure basket of the government that has gone well, that Mr. Kant spoke about in terms of figures, but also there is reduction in pensions and interest payouts for borrowings from the market, coupled with revenue mobilization. I think that, 5 out of 6 budgets, she's kind of under-promised and over-delivered on tax collection. I think she's gained a lot of confidence in terms of what she has set out as a target that also gives more confidence to the government from capex allocation standpoint. So I think this period will stand out, barring any black swan kind of external events. I think, her statement that India is going to experience a sustainable growth in the next 5 years, though political in some way, assumes significance. So this is one message. The second message is the new definition of FDI, first developed in India. I think this again goes back to lend thrust to Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat program, which hopefully combined with the global value chain that Vipin was speaking about in the morning, is leading us to a direction of what we will see in the Finance Bill 2 of July 2024.
Right, but the first part of what you said is actually very striking because as you are saying, a lot of good things have happened. You're spending on capital, you're building infrastructure, you're therefore building assets for the country. And despite that, you are being able to bring your fiscal deficit down a certain amount. It also means that whatever you've done with tax buoyancy is good. So the numbers are moving in the right direction. Absolutely. It's not that you're cutting off capital spending. Correct. To be able to achieve
so if you look at the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act of 2004, just before the financial crisis, we were best insofar as the actual figure of fiscal deficit and revenue deficit was. But the quality of spending was not as good. So I think the golden period that I'm talking about is her quality of spending that has assumed momentum. You see, you cannot curtail capex now anymore. Somebody was talking about it in the other panel. Don't you think 10% is less? Well, I think 10% is very good if you look at the base and the impact that is likely to create. But then we still need to see that in Finance Bill 2, whether she actually takes up the capital base.
You're also assuming, as she did, that she's going to be back delivering the budget in July. So we'll have to see how it all pans out. But I think, yes, credit for, for some of the ways in which she's actually managed the numbers. Your sense, now that we've heard the interim budget, really short speech, 1 hour, much smaller than everyone was expecting. What was your sense of it?
I think it's a very confident government. I mean, confident government in delivering and taking on some hard numbers. So I'll just pick up one on what Amitabh Kant said, that the action is in the states and states have to reform. And I mentioned before, states need to have their visions also set for a Viksit Bharat. Incentivizing state through linking financial deliveries with states will enhance their own reform program. Also want to take on from what Mukesh said, actually very confident of the revenue boosts that she is planning to be able to say, I'll increase capital capex by 11% but also deliver 5.1%. Now, nobody really, I think, was talking of 5.1%. It was 5.3, 5.4, 50 basis points adequate. It's more than 50 basis points.
Yeah, I would love to see how those numbers actually pan out. So we'll have to see. Rajan Navani now joining us. Just wanted to get your sense, Mr. Navani, of the interim budget. Final thoughts from everybody on what we make of it and till we wait for the full budget in July.
No, I think my thoughts are very similar to what has been discussed so far. I think, the good part about this budget is built upon the foundations of previous budgets, still demonstrating great fiscal prudence, as most people have said, and focusing on, increasing capital expenditure and also the areas that are of immediate need for a country like India. But one thing, Vikram, that stands out for me particularly is that, 1 lakh crore corpus, which is going to go towards, long-term at zero cost or very low interest for the building the research ecosystem, technology, innovation ecosystem for India. Because I think the good part about the way this is panning out is that, the government itself is a great customer of innovation. Looking at the investment that's happening in digital public infrastructure, today India has honestly been able to demonstrate to the world, the low cost at which it could build UPI transactions, etc. 45% of the world transactions happen here. And as this digital public infrastructure goes into agriculture, goes into healthcare and many other areas, I think the opportunity for Indian entrepreneurs and businesses to create, product-led innovation ecosystems around the world will become much larger, as these systems will get deployed largely in Global South, where price performance will always be a very big driver. So to me, the excitement is, India started its journey as Startup India, moved to Scale Up India, and now to a Research First India. I think that could be a great way for multiple stakeholders to come together to make investing in research as cool as investing in startups, because that's the layer that needs to get strengthened for India to position itself, on a global stage as it comes over the next 25 years in the Amrit Kaal. So to me, I think directionally, the budget focus on technology, focus on key issues, whether it's women and children together, the youth, along with investments in the right level of infrastructure is a big plus for this budget.
All right, Rajan Navani, Vipin, Mr. Bhutani, thank you all so much for joining us. I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave it there for the moment. Thank you all for watching this special coverage of the interim budget. But break follows, and on the other side of that, all the rest of our regular programming. Thanks a lot for watching.
on the next episode of World of Africa. Ethiopia's deal to leave a port in Somalia's breakaway region of Somaliland has infuriated the government in Mogadishu and prompted concerns it will further destabilize the Horn of Africa region. Outrage in Kenya over the rise in femicide cases as thousands march and hold protests to call for urgent government action. And beekeepers turn away from honey and harvest venom instead, which is popular in alternative medicine. World of Africa, at these times, only on WION. World is one.
Ready to dive into your daily dose of news?
Bringing you what's trending in the West and all that's setting trends in the East.
And all of this served up with a side of insightful banter.
We don't just bring you the latest stories.
We bring you your talking points for the day.
And while you do that, from the busy streets of New York, I will provide you with deeper insights on the developments through the course of the day in the U.S.
From New York, we get you to the sandy shores of Durban, where I'll bring you all the glitz, glam, and happenings from the world of showbiz.
Welcome to the Eras Tour.
And I will be here at the WION headquarters, getting you all the action from the universe of sport. All that you need to know about your favorite teams and players, right here.
The show that keeps you ahead of the global curve. A conversation you'd want to be a part of. A place where news becomes an engaging exchange.
We bring you stories that impact your present.
This is World DNA. Join the conversation.
WION Health Resort is unique, the only one of its kind. Experience the 4 paths of natural wellness: yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy. Each uniquely customized program improves the whole person to make every person whole. Come to WION Health Resort. Make your reservation at yowon.com.
We are one, you and I, burning in the sun, rising in the rain, one in celebration, one in pain, one in a tragedy, one for our rights, one in search of hope, one in our fights. One beyond borders. One beyond our race.
This could be one
in the face of adversity. We are one, you and I, and it's our right to know how and why. WION, you are more connected than you know.
Hi, you're watching WION World is One. I am Isha Hanspal. A look at the headlines. India's Prime Minister hails the interim budget, says it will empower youth, poor, women and farmers. Calls it a budget for India's future.
We are working to make India a Vikasit Bharat by 2047.
The Narendra Modi government is working towards making India a developed nation by 2047, says Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman as she presents the 2024 interim budget in a special session of the Parliament. In her last budget presentation ahead of big elections, India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman expresses hope that the BJP-led government will be blessed again by the people with a resounding mandate in the forthcoming general elections. Members of a Hindu priest's family start praying at the cellar in the basement of Varanasi's Gyanvapi Mosque after a district court ordered the administration to unseal the premises 30 years after it was sealed. Protesting farmers clogged roads around an EU summit taking place in Brussels on Thursday with around 1,000 tractors. The much-anticipated showdown between Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi is off. The Portuguese superstar has been ruled out of Al Nassr's friendly against Messi's Inter Miami with an injury. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has unveiled the interim budget for 2024-25. From the nation's resolute response to the challenges posed by the pandemic to initiatives fostering inclusive growth, we dissect the key points that shape the economic landscape. Well, the Finance Minister began with how in the last decade India has undergone a profound economic transformation. She highlights a decade of robust growth marked by the inclusive mantra Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. The nation's development philosophy extends across all spheres of inclusivity, overcoming the challenges posed by a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. She further said that the government's commitment to all-around, all-pervasive and all-inclusive growth is evident in its vision to make India a developed nation by 2047.
Social justice. Our government is working with an approach to development that is all-round, all-pervasive and all-inclusive. Sarvangin, Sarvasparshi or Sarvasamaveshi. It covers all castes and people at all levels. We are working to make India a Vikasit Bharat by 2047.
Shifting our focus to the fiscal landscape now, the government aims for a balanced approach. The fiscal deficit target is set at 5.8% of the GDP, indicating a prudent fiscal strategy. Now, looking ahead to the FY25, there is an optimistic projection with the fiscal deficit expected to reduce to 5.1%. Now, India aims to lower fiscal deficit below 4.5% by FY26. Now, zooming in on the
we continue
capital expenditure.
On the fiscal consolidation. As announced in my budget speech of 2021-22, to reduce fiscal deficit below 4.5% by 25-26. The fiscal deficit in 2024-25 is estimated to be 5.1% of GDP, adhering to that path. The Indian economy has witnessed profound positive transformation in the last 10 years.
Now, zooming in on the capital expenditure, the surge reflects the strategic push for development initiatives across sectors. The doubling of airports to 149 and the addition of 570 new routes signal a significant leap in connectivity, fostering growth in the travel and tourism sector. Additionally, the first Develop India approach echoes in the doubling of foreign direct investments from 2005 to 2014. Amid these economic milestones, it is worth noting that there are no changes in the tax slabs as predicted. Now, here are some reactions on the newly unveiled interim budget.
एक ऐतिहासिक बजट है जो पूर्ण रूप से परिलक्षित करता है कि प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी के नेतृत्व में जो भारत में एक नई क्रांति और परिवर्तन पिछले एक दशक में आई है, एक विकसित भारत का लक्ष्य, एक आत्मनिर्भर भारत का लक्ष्य, एक विश्व गुरु बनने का लक्ष्य, उन तीनों लक्ष्यों के प्रति पूर्ण स्पर्धा के साथ और गति के साथ भारत बढ़ चुका है.
Well, it was one of the shortest speeches on record in the budget, and not very much came out of it. As usual, a lot of rhetorical language, very little concrete on implementation. Some serious questions about areas of omission. No reference to the success or failure of the PLI scheme, which is taking so much money. She talked about foreign investment without acknowledging that investment has come down significantly. She talked, frankly, about a number of things that are couched in vague language like for confidence and hope and so on. But when it comes to hard figures, there were very few figures available.
We are now being joined by Mark Brolin, who is a senior economist and geopolitical strategist, and he is joining us live on this broadcast. Mark, thank you so much for joining us on this bulletin. My first question to you is, if you could just tell us, elaborate for us, did the budget address the cost of globalization, like supply chain issues, elevated inflation, and higher for longer interest rates?
Sorry, the question? I missed that bit.
Sure. Mark, if you could hear me properly, I will repeat the question for you. Just since you have analyzed the budget for us, I wanted to understand for our viewers as well, did this budget address the cost of deglobalization, like the supply chain issues, elevated inflation, or longer interest rates?
Yeah, that's a great question, since I think this budget is very much designed towards, in a way, the international investors. And I think the finance minister is, of course, well aware that there is lots of money up for grabs. International investors are sort of not especially keen on China and Europe right now. And at the time when India is needing international money to meet its ambitious growth targets. So the sales pitch, I think it's towards international investors, I think it even exceeded expectations. Fiscal prudence is important for international investors, of course, because of the inflation issue and the closely linked weak rupee. Capex infrastructure spending, very important as well, given that the finance minister is pushing India as a manufacturing hub, and that will, as you were saying, help to solve the supply chain issues if international investors will invest money in India. And of course, if infrastructure makes transport costs lower, that will be a big boost for manufacturing industry. So I do think she very much played on the friend-shoring concept or sentiment, which is sort of in vogue right now.
Okay. Mark, also do tell us, does India's interim budget here position India to be a developed economy by 2047? Where do these global investors see value unlocking in India's economy?
But that's so special with India, and I think that's part of the growth miracle in a way, that it's such a diversified economy. If you compare that to, for example, other Brazil or Indonesia or other emerging economies that are also growing fast, it's diversified in so many ways. You have manufacturing, you have AI, of course, technology, but it's across the board. India is an interesting place. So it's hard to actually pinpoint individual sectors because there are so many that are interesting for. And it's such a huge market, of course, the world's largest population. It's domestically when it has developed a bit more. This is such a great place to be. So it will be interesting across the board, I think.
Right. When you speak about India's growth, would you say that India can grow inclusively and sustainably?
Well, I mean, some measures have to be taken. There are challenges. India is in a great place in many ways, in so many ways, and it's unique since so many other countries in the world are not. But of course, there are challenges that have to be tackled. The ones we mentioned, the weak rupee and the inflation issue, that has to be addressed, and that's what the finance minister has been doing with this budget, I think. But then we have the corruption issue. That's many countries are affected by that, but so is India, and I think the problem has decreased a bit over the next 10 years or so, but it's still a problem, and that problem is also linked heavily to the regulatory regime. Many foreign, not least foreigners, foreign investors see it as a big problem with all the states and different regulations in different states and territories of India. So it's a bit of a struggle to actually settle still. So that has to be tackled. We have conglomerates. That's one challenge that has to be tackled as well. That's a problem that is affecting conglomerates can lead to a pro-big business rather than pro-free markets situation. And that's a problem that is dragging down the Eurozone in a big way. So that I think India has to perhaps take note from what's happening in Europe and avoid that problem. Then we have imported energy shocks that could happen. And also inclusivity, the labour participation rate. The finance minister is addressing this as well. Of course, the number of women in the workforce need to increase. That's what has happened in all other rich countries. So challenges exist. But there are so many things going India's way. So if they are tackled, there is so many upsides.
Right. Challenges are excess, but so many things going India's way. Thank you so much, Mark Browling, for joining us with your perspective on this.
Thank you.
Well, moving on, India's central bank has dropped the hammer on Paytm Payments Bank. In a move prompted by supervisory concerns, the central bank has imposed stringent restrictions on the digital banking giant. Paytm stocks reacted harshly, plunging 20% and hitting its lower circuit. Now, this means Paytm can no longer accept new deposits, credit transactions or top-ups in any account after February 29th. Existing customers can still withdraw or still use their existing balances freely, including savings accounts, prepaid instruments and digital wallets. While the basic account access remains, services like fund transfers and UPI payments are now off limits for Paytm. The bank is facing a deadline of March 15th to settle all pending transactions and obligations. The Reserve Bank cited persistent non-compliance and continued material supervisory concerns as reasons for its action. These concerns stem from audits and compliance checks revealing issues with Paytm's practices. Details of these concerns haven't officially been disclosed, but could involve data security, customer protection, or regulatory violation. Paytm faces the immediate challenge of addressing these concerns and regaining the regulatory trust needed to resume normal operations. The inability to add new funds or use the platform for transactions like sending money will impact daily usage. For those heavily reliant on Paytm, alternative digital payment options, traditional banking channels or cash might become necessary. Well, time will tell what the long-term implications are for Paytm and its wider user base. But for now, caution and exploring alternative options might be prudent. Now, extending the prolonged dry spell, several places in India are receiving snowfall as well as rainfall. According to the Indian Weather Department, the IMD, North India is most likely to receive above normal rainfall this month. Well, the winter chills in the capital, Delhi, took a surprising turn as light rainfall intensified the cold, with the maximum temperature dropping to 18.6 degrees Celsius, and this is 4 notches below the season's normal. The low temperature also dipped to 7.3 degrees Celsius. The Weather Office has forecast thunderstorms and gusty winds in the first week of February. Rainfall is expected to continue in Delhi NCR due to a western disturbance with fresh snowfall in the northern states of India. Himachal Pradesh and Jammu and Kashmir, the Meteorological Department has predicted light rain and snow from February 1st to the 4th in many parts of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, the weather conditions led to flight and train operations being hampered due to dense fog. The Indira Gandhi International Airport in New Delhi saw diversions of flights, and several trains were running late due to the very dense fog. The rainfall did clear the air, but despite the rainfall, the air quality index is still very poor. According to the Weather Department, light to moderate rain and snowfall accompanied by thunderstorms and lightning will be recorded at most places in Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand from the 31st of January to the 4th of February. Meanwhile, light to heavy rainfall is forecast in Rajasthan, Haryana, Punjab, Delhi and Uttar Pradesh. Myanmar's military government is extending the state of emergency that it imposed after seizing power 2 years ago. Now, the move sets back prospects for an anticipated August election in the country. The military extended the state of emergency for 6 more months, claiming that the country is in an abnormal situation and time is needed to prepare for a peaceful election. The emergency extension comes on the eve of the 3rd anniversary of the military coup. The United Nations Rights Chief said the human rights situation in Myanmar is in free fall. In Thailand and Philippines, protesters marked the 3rd anniversary of the Myanmar coup, gathering outside the UN office to protest. On the other hand, the United States marked the 3-year anniversary by slapping further sanctions on Myanmar. The US sanctions are aimed at limiting supplies of the aviation fuel that the junta needs to conduct aerial bombings on anti-coup forces. The emergency announcement also seems to be an admission that the army has failed to quell the widespread opposition to military rule. Now, in recent weeks, this opposition has found expression in armed resistance, non-violent protests and civil disobedience. A local monitoring group, in fact, said over 4,400 people have been killed in the military's crackdown on dissent and over 25,000 have been arrested. Russian President Vladimir Putin will visit Turkey on February 12th to meet his counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Now, the visit will mark the Russian leader's first trip to a NATO ally since Moscow's invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. Now, Putin's scope to travel abroad has been limited since last year. In March of 2023, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant against him for the alleged deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia, a war crime. Russia denied the charge and called the move outrageous, but said it was legally void in any case because Russia is not a member of the ICC. Turkey is also not a party to the Rome Statute of the ICC, so Putin can travel to Turkey without fear of being arrested under the warrant. Turkey, which shares a maritime border with both Ukraine and Russia, has sought to maintain good ties with both nations since Moscow's invasion. It has provided military support to Kyiv and voiced support for its territorial integrity, but also opposes sanctions on Russia. Now, Ankara has sought to convince Russia to return to the Black Sea Grain Initiative. The deal was brokered by UN and Turkey to provide protected exports from Ukrainian ports. Moscow withdrew from the pact last July, following a year of implementation. Erdogan has said alternatives to the deal could not provide a lasting solution, while Kyiv has said talks were underway for a revival of the deal. Moscow has said it was not interested in reinstating it. Ankara and Kyiv recently signed an accord to allow Turkish firms to take part in reconstructing Ukrainian infrastructure damaged by the war. Turkey has close economic ties with Russia, particularly in tourism, gas supplies, grain and agricultural trade that make Western nations uneasy. However, the two have also been at loggerheads over conflicts in Syria and Libya, where they back opposing sides, as well as over tensions between Azerbaijan and Armenia in the South Caucasus. Anxiety is showing at the very top of Ukraine's wartime government. Ukraine and the Western media reports state that Zelensky had moved to fire Zaluzhny, who has heading the armed forces since before Russia's 2022 invasion. Russia says the possible standoff is an inevitable result of Ukraine's bogged-down military. Various reports suggested Zaluzhny is being replaced by Kirilo Budanov, chief of Ukraine's GUR military intelligence. Citing sources in Zelensky's office, Ukrainian site ZNUA reported the president met the commander-in-chief on Monday. Zelensky reportedly suggested Zaluzhny stand down and write a letter of resignation. Zaluzhny rejected the proposal, and the president did not dismiss him. According to other reports, Zaluzhny was offered another role, either as an advisor or as an ambassador. Zelensky's office has denied plans to remove Zaluzhny, and the defense ministry also called the reports untrue. Zelensky himself has not commented on the reports that some see as a leak to test public opinion about the idea of a change in military leadership. Now, differences between the two men were thrust into the spotlight last year. In a high-profile 2023 interview with The Economist, Zaluzhny said the war had ground to a stalemate. Zelensky publicly rejected that assertion is the first sign of a possible rift between the president and his commander-in-chief. Well, with that, we come to the end of this broadcast, but stay tuned to WION World is One for more news and updates.
India's Global Voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION. World is One.
In 1979, two batchmates from CMTI teamed up with their mentor to create a small engineering design bureau.
We could conceive machines from first principles, and that's where we got the confidence that can we start a consulting company where we do design for others. We have got an opportunity to make special machines for a company called Car Mobiles Limited. Once we started showing the exhibition, other auto component companies started coming to us. We realized that if you want to learn anything, buy the best book on the subject, study the fundamentals, and apply it in your context.
As election fever grips Pakistan, WION gets you all the twists and turns. The row over election and selection. players who matter and what's at stake.
नौजवानों का मुस्तकबिल मेरी सबसे ज्यादा तवज्जो होगी। गुर्बत का खात्मा करना होगा। एक बार मौका दीजिए।
अगर आप अपने हुकूक के लिए नहीं खड़े हो, आप गुलामों की जिंदगी गुजारो।
The highs and lows as the campaign peaks.
आगे बढ़े।
I'm Anas Malik. Catch me on WION as I bring you all the latest updates and developments from ground zero.
Who will emerge as Pakistan's next leader?
We are one, you and I. Burning in the sun. Rising in the rain. One in celebration. One in pain. One in a tragedy. One for our rights. One in search of hope. One in our fights. One beyond borders. One beyond our race.
This could be one of
One in the face of adversity. We are one, you and I, and it's all right to know how and why. WION, you are more connected than you know. WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION. World is one.
As election fever grips Pakistan, WION gets you all the twists and turns. The row over election and selection. Players who matter and what's at stake.
नौजवानों का मुस्तकबिल मेरी सबसे ज्यादा तवज्जो होगी। गुर्बत का खात्मा करना होगा। एक बार मौका दीजिए।
अगर आप अपने हुकूक के लिए नहीं खड़े हो, आप गुलामों की जिंदगी गुजारो।
The highs and lows as the campaign peaks.
आगे बढ़े।
I'm Anas Malik. Catch me on WION as I bring you all the latest updates and developments from ground zero.
Who will emerge as Pakistan's next leader?
On the next episode of World of Africa, Ethiopia's deal to leave a port in Somalia's breakaway region of Somaliland has infuriated the government in Mogadishu and prompted concerns it will further destabilize the Horn of Africa region. Outrage in Kenya over the rise in femicide cases as thousands march and hold protests to call for urgent government action. And beekeepers turn away from honey and harvest venom instead, which is popular in alternative medicine. World of Africa, at these times, only on WION. World is one.
Hi, welcome back. You're watching WION World is One and I am Nisha Hanspal. As always, first a look at the headlines. India's Prime Minister hails the interim budget, says it will empower youth, poor, women and farmers. Calls it a budget for India's future.
We are working to make India a Vikasit Bharat by 2047.
The Narendra Modi government is working towards making India a developed nation by 2047, says Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman as she presents the 2024